Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe. This is Just a Cup with Brian Fetzer. And today I have with me Bridget Williams, the 2023 Pan Am Games women's pole vault champion. Bridget, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's exciting to get to have a little cup of Joe with you.
Look at that.
Now that is a mug.
And we got the who's on the back.
Wahoo wah.
Yeah.
Wahoo wah. Which is that we'll start off with that. You went to Virginia from Pennsylvania originally, and now you are training down in Blacksburg, where the rival of Virginia is Virginia Tech. You know, what has that been like as an athlete, leaving college, and then going in and going to a different environment and into, some would say, a rival environment?
Yeah, they opened me with welcome arms, which is all I could have asked for. I made the transition in 2020 in the midst of COVID. I was getting married. We had bought a house. My husband is from this part of Virginia, so it only made sense to start transitioning my pole vaulting career to Virginia Tech. But I won't lie, it has been, at first especially, I felt really guilty. I felt like I had, been a traitor almost, because I felt like UVA had really built me up and took a chance on me in terms of athletics. And so it was a strange feeling to leave a place that you kind of created. I kind of made home for myself, and then to start over somewhere new. But all that to say, everybody here has made the transition over the last 3.5-ish years very, very smooth. And like I said, they've opened me with open arms and have really helped me take my career to the next level. So I'm eternally grateful for their openness.
Well, speaking of next levels, I mean, in college, you're an NCAA All-American at UVA, and then ACC champion, and then just recently you get to go to the World Championships, compete for the U.S., and then obviously the big one just recently, which we're gonna talk about your trip with the Pan Am Games too, because I think that's a fascinating story. But you win the Pan Am Games. What was it like, winning a gold medal for a country?
Yeah, it was incredible. I think, everyone was asking me during the medal ceremony, how I was feeling or what I was thinking. And the only thing that I could say was that it was almost like a surreal experience, I guess. I felt like in my head, I saw every, triumph and feat that I went through in my career leading up to that point. And then I almost saw this like vision or projection of what could be hopefully one day an Olympic medal or making an Olympic team and what that would feel like. And so I felt like, yeah, it was just really special. And the crowd in Chile was just, nothing like I had ever experienced. Just people that were so excited about track and field. And the same thing at the World Championships in Budapest. Just that kind of crowd that loves track and field, wants to see great performances. It was just incredible to be a part of.
Do you think before the show, we were kind of talking a little bit about, you said the World Championships wasn't your greatest moment or your greatest performance. How did that prepare you, transitioning into your next major competition? I would say the Pan Am Games.
Sure.
How did you transition with that?
Yeah, I felt like definitely like in the world prelim, I felt like I held my ground, and that was really encouraging to make the final, to jump, the auto qualifier 465. But in the final, I think things fell apart. I was the only girl to miss at 450, which set me back in the order. And I don't think, from a personal perspective, I don't think I made the necessary adjustments fast enough. Like from a mental perspective, I don't think I held my mental fortitude as well as I had, or as well as I know I can. And ultimately, I think that took me out more than, the mental side of things took me out of the game more than an athletic standpoint. But all that to say, I felt like, I made a mistake in the final, and that was a mistake that, you recognize, you learn from, you probably won't make it again, in that same exact way. And so when I got to the Pan American Games, there were it wasn't like a perfect competition, right? Like I didn't have a clean card. My warm-ups were not, um, if you would have judged based on warm-ups, they weren't something where people were going to say, yeah, that girl's going to win. They were not great. But I kept reminding, and I was able to recall at Pan Am's, like, okay, you've been in a big crowd before. You've been in the big stadium. You learned from Worlds. You know what it's like to have some pressure behind you. And I felt like everything I experienced and learned from Worlds was, kind of put into play at Pan Am's, but I was able to overcome what I wasn't able to overcome at the World Championships. So
you talked about the mental preparation. How, I mean, that gets thrown around so much. You hear announcers all the time, oh, it's the mental preparation.
Mm-hmm.
How important is that when you get on the runway, that you're in the right mental state of mind? Does it take over from all the experience that you have, or how does that play?
Yeah, I think it's both. It's something that I've been working with sports psych almost weekly on, especially in this off season. You know, not to get into it a bunch, but not many people know I had some vestibular issues for the better half of this past season, and they really caught up to me as the season progressed. Just signs of vertigo and just plain dizziness. And so I felt like, in terms of mental preparation for me, I think when you have like physical ailments, and this can be related to all ailments, right? Like you're sore, or you don't feel your greatest, or whatever. I think the mental preparation to know and to recognize like this radical acceptance of where you are at a given time, and then just work from that point forward the best you can. Breath work is great for mental preparation. I just think a lot of it, I think, especially in the pole vault, I would argue that most of the success is mental, right?
Mm.
Like you can be technically sound or not. I'm not the best technical jumper, but one of my goals every time I step out on a track or for a competition is I want to be the strongest one out there mentally, right? And we talk about, what does that mean? I want to be able to compose myself. I want to compete with grace, grit, composure, bravery. I want to, execute to the best of my ability. And I think all of that comes from, just this belief in yourself that is manifested over time through small victories that you have, or small successes, not medals or PRs, but just like, okay, in this moment, I'm able to recognize where I'm at for what it is, and I'm going to recenter, or I'm going to be able to recall cues and try to execute what you can control, instead of being distracted by the noise, or, oh, I missed a bar. And I think that is exactly where I screwed up at Worlds, right? I got kind of my feathers got ruffled, and I wasn't able to refocus my mental composure, and then I fell apart.
Are those things you work on during practice, that you're actually
I think
rehearsing in practice?
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, I especially in practice. I think one of the greatest maybe pieces of advice that I've gotten from sports psych at Virginia Tech and at UVA. I've gone through sports psychology my whole entire athletic career, but it's to treat practice like a competition, right? Like, call the cues that you're going to use in a meet, do them in practice. See if they work, see if they resonate, see if you're able to execute what you're trying to tell, like what you are telling yourself to do. And that way, when you show up at a meet and there is some adversity, you can kind of use your cues or whatever it is to recenter.
So if somebody is new to pole vault, they don't know anything about pole vault, and I mean, you give them some amazing insight into the mental capacity of what goes on as a pole vaulter and as really as an athlete. But how would you describe pole vault to the person that has no idea what it is?
Well, it's definitely thrilling. It's challenging. It's hard, but it's super fun. I think the vault is one of the events that you are able to really capture the audience's attention, right? It's like entertainment. You're putting on a show. It's cool because not every single person watching you can do it,
Right.
right?
Right.
You're running as fast as you can with with a pole in your hand, and then planting it into the ground and seeing how high you can jump. I think for most people, they're like, "What? Why do you do that? You know, or how do
Right.
you do that? Aren't you
Like jumping
afraid?"
into a second story window. I mean, it's kind
Yeah,
of crazy.
exactly. Yeah. So, um, but it's always really fun. I think too, pole vault is people are curious, right? So they're always asking you, like, what does it feel like? Or I always get asked the question, what's the most um, scary part? They always like, are asking me, is it coming down, like landing on the mat? I'm like, no, the scariest part is leaving the ground, like getting yourself off the ground, can be sometimes the most challenging and like, okay, here we go.
When was the first time you pole vaulted in life?
Mm. What was it like, you
I
said?
said, when was it?
Oh,
When
when?
was it?
I think I started in sixth grade, middle school.
What was that like? Was it like a straight pole you just ran down and just,
Oh yeah, I
got off
think
the ground or?
I was thinking about this at the end of the season. I tried to do like a little reflection of how I thought the whole thing went, and that was one thing that came to mind. I was like, man, I really wish I could remember the very first time I jumped, and I can't. Like, I just have no
Hmm.
recollection of what that very first time was like. But I do have memories of like ninth grade or eighth grade track and field where I'm pole vaulting, and I'm still going over in a straight pole, like body in an L, no upside down, no bends, no nothing, and I'm jumping like 9 feet, which still is not that great. Um, but yeah, it has been like a slow burn.
That's awesome. So wait, okay. So what is a day in the life of a professional pole vaulter? A
Mm.
professional track athlete, really?
Yeah, I think for me it changes. Day to day is pretty
During
flexible.
the season. How about during the season in the middle of your competing? What is a normal day like for you?
Well, I wake up slow mornings. I keep my morning block pretty free so I can have coffee and, um,
Coffee's needed.
yeah, coffee is
Yeah,
needed.
little shout out. If you're ever in Southern California, you
Yeah.
need to roll to Earth Cafe. Awesome place.
You're the
Great
second
vibe.
person that just told us about Earth Cafe. We ran into a family friend at Chipotle the other day,
Really?
and they had just bought a apartment out in California somewhere. I don't remember, and they were talking about Earth Cafe.
I blame all my coffee on three people: Pete Watson, Ed Miller from Cal Berkeley, and Zach Harriet, who was runner
Yep,
with you at
I
Virginia.
remember Zach.
I blame all of my coffee. They make me a coffee snob.
Yeah.
I collect coffee mugs from all the places around the United States that I've traveled as a coach and
Yeah.
business person, and yeah, I blame all of them for that. So that's
I
kind of
blame
odd.
James. Yeah, because I did not drink coffee in college. Like, didn't like it, didn't want it. And when we started dating, he would always say, here, just have a sip, try. And now I love black coffee, right? Like, he drinks
Amen.
black coffee too. We always buy. We've bought for years. There's an organic roast, like a mild body roast, from Fresh Roasted Coffee Company. They're in Pennsylvania, and so that's
Huh,
our go-to. But
nice.
we just bought an espresso machine as an early Christmas gift to each other.
Ooh,
So we can make some fancy.
ooh. Espresso, that lights me up too much. That's a
Yeah.
bit much, a bit much. But no, I interrupted you, said
No, no, no,
coffee, and I got fired up. Because
no,
it's
no, no.
just a
I
cup.
forget. What did you ask me?
I said, "What's a normal day like?"
Oh, normal day in life.
You
Yeah.
got
So
the
normal
coffee.
coffee. Right. Yeah. I like to keep my mornings open. It gives me time to kind of like set intentions for the day. And then I will practice. Right. So on any given day, the schedule changes. We basically do two workouts each week, right? Of each thing. So two vault days, two running days, two gymnastics days / recovery. And then I'm lifting 3 times right now, but in season I'll lift
So
two.
so explain about gymnastics days. What in the world
Yeah.
does that mean?
So
Are you getting on the uneven bars? Or what are you
yeah,
doing?
so at Virginia Tech, we have this little gymnastics corner with a high bar, strap bar, rings, a rope, a little pulley system to practice like the invert of the vault. And so twice a week we go over there, and it's a lot of like general strength, body weight um, stuff just to get us strong and allow us to improve our movement in space, right? So we do a lot of bubkas on the high bar, a lot of back hip circles, a lot of hanging core is great. Kind of emulate the same motions on the rings, just different. I guess you have less stability, so works different muscles because you're trying to stabilize yourself on the moving obstacle.
Do you think weight strength training in general is has helped you out a lot? I mean, you are a very strong woman, and that does that translate into the pole vault?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I like to get stuff done in the weight room. I like to feel strong. But I also like to run fast. So I think for me, I'm not that tall. I think also Bob would tell you the same thing, or anybody that's coached me in the past. Like if you have 3 buckets of the vault, right, of components that are making an athlete better, you've got strength, speed, and technical work. And
Yep.
that technical bucket is always the weakest, or has been in the past the weakest for me. And so what I was going to say is that it's just from a strength side of things, it's always hard to find a balance because you don't want to be too strong, not too strong, but too
Yeah.
heavy, right? Because then that could affect speed timing. And so we were just talking about this yesterday, like the optimal strength and weight, body weight or whatever is when you run the fastest. And so that's kind of what we have our eye on this fall as we're going in. And but to get back to your question about day in life and when I'm training, I mean, practice takes up the middle chunk of the day, and then the evenings are just spent, doing other stuff that I need to do that everyone else has to do: clean the house, help make
Clean
dinner,
the house,
time with
make
my
dinner.
husband, etc. Just sometimes I feel like I live a double life, right? Like I'm training to be this elite pole vaulter and like push myself to the highest level of sport, and then the other half I feel like I'm this homebody wife, want to be super involved in my community and church, and just trying to be well rounded in everything that I encompass. But
So I've got to say this because I've kind of had to rehearse it multiple times, saying Bridget Williams, and for people that out there don't know, I was a coach at UVA when Bridget was there and recruited her, and so it was Bridget Guy at that point in time. So now that she married James, who was also on our team, who was a all ACC thrower, now it's Bridget Williams. So how has that transition been? Because I can speak from a personal standpoint, just getting married and me screwing up my wife's last name. So how has that been transition for you?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, and James knows this too. Like at the very beginning, before we were married, I was like, I want his last name, and I'm, all for it, and I still am. But when it came time to do so, it was like COVID, and there was so much change, and this is like pride on my end, and I'm outing myself, but I feel like maybe other young people who get married younger will feel the same way. I almost had this like sentimental attachment to my last name, right? Like everybody knew me as Bridget Guy. And especially in the track world,
Oh
like
yeah.
that I had built my career, I guess you could say, around under that name. And so like it, I think more so as like a defense mechanism back in 2020, because like I said earlier, I had, um, COVID had shut down everything, right? I was still living at UVA, but I knew I was getting married. We had just bought a house in Blacksburg. Um, we were getting married that summer, and so it was all this change, and I knew that I was going to have this hard decision to figure out whether I was to stay in Charlottesville and train post collegiately there or come to Virginia Tech. And COVID just kind of expedited all of this change, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like digging my heels into the ground, thinking like, what can I hold on to that is mine? Because I felt like all this other stuff was, kind of being changed at a pace that I guess I just hadn't prepared for, I guess. And so the last name was as silly as it sounds. Like it took me a year, mostly circumstantial, just because of everything was delayed. And like it was a voting year and all the things. I wanted to make sure I had, like the right name.
Right.
Yeah, because I didn't, everything was so backlogged. But yeah, I think now Bridget Williams' name has stuck, even to people in the track world. But I will say people that have known me for a long, long time, including my now coach, Bob Phillips, like he always still refers to me as guy, like remember who you are.
That's funny. That's fun. Bob's a great guy, and it's
Yeah.
I mean, you're under good hands for sure.
Mm.
You are listening to Just a Cup on Believe. Brian Fetzer, host here with Bridget Williams, the 2023 Pan Am Games champion in the women's pole vault. Just talking a lot of different things. We're just talking about name changes and the adjustment of world championships, the Pan Am Games, and an athlete. A lot of times, you mentioned kind of being known by, you're, hey, this is what I built my career on. I'm known as a pole vaulter. I'm known as things. What do you do outside of track and field, or what are you trying to do outside of track and field
Mm-hmm.
to help your community, help people along?
Sure. Yeah. So I work part time at our church in town here. I am, jack of all trades. I'm an administrator to our priests, and then I do a lot of planning for fellowship activities that we host at our church. Um, so I coordinate. We do meals on Wednesday nights throughout the fall and throughout the spring, and then we do coffee hour every Sunday. So that falls on me to coordinate and make sure we have volunteers. I help plan, just different uh, Bible study classes for members of our church and community, people who are interested in learning more about the church or their faith. And so that has been a really fruitful outlet for me, and I'm super grateful that it is a job that's flexible enough, right? But it also fills me, and kind of like it's like a two-way thing, right? Like I feel like I'm able to help people in my community and in my church, but then also I'm also getting this reward, if you want to say, because I feel like they give me community too. And that I will say as a small plug, like my church was a really strong pillar for me when I first moved here, because I felt like, oh gosh, I don't have any friends and I don't have all this. I don't have community, right? I don't have this
Right.
strong community that I had in Charlottesville. And it took me 6 years there, right, to build this strong
Right.
community that felt of people who felt like family. And to be uprooted from that and move to Blacksburg, I was like, oh gosh, like I really miss my community. And so the church, I felt like, really gave me that sense of fellowship and just wisdom and everything that I was looking for. So I'm really grateful to be working alongside of everybody that is there. And then, like I had said before we started recording too, like I am such a firm believer, and I will preach it until forever, that I believe I believe we are so much more than our sport. And I think it's really hard to remember that, especially when you're in the thick of it, or you're trying to achieve a big goal or working towards a big goal. You can kind of get lost in the numbers and your performances, and then your worth starts to get tied up in all of that. And that's something that I really try to express to young athletes in our community, whether that, other high schools or even just the collegiate team that I train alongside. I think that is such an important piece of wisdom that sometimes gets lost or underemphasized. And so I feel like if anybody, any younger athlete or any athlete that I know takes away anything from me, I hope it's that they realize and feel encouraged that you don't have to be just your sport. Like you can be more than your sport, and it's okay to invest in different things. It doesn't mean that you're taking, all your effort away from your sport. Balance, I think, actually can make you a better athlete, if you're well-rounded
Absolutely.
and have an outlet. And I think for me, I think community, right? Whether you find that at your church or another social group or just alongside people that you train with, like you don't always have to talk track and field, right? You can open to, I know it's hard. Believe me, I
You're
know,
right.
to not talk about track and field sometimes, or not talk about what could be or should have been or whatever. But if you can find, that solid group of people and fellowship in different ways, I think it can, yeah, I just think that's really
So,
important.
so you mentioned, I think a lot of people I say the majority of people, when somebody says, they're a professional athlete or they're, they just compete in the world championships or Pan
Mhm.
American games, I think a lot of people have this misconception with track and field that it's the same as the NBA or the NFL or the NHL or Major League Baseball, that, there's all this salary out there. When you start talking about my job, my part-time
Right,
job that I
right,
do, give people a reality shot of a professional track and field athlete that you see on TV.
right.
And I'm repping an old school American track lead
Okay,
shirt.
yeah.
When I say old school, I mean I think this was back in like
Yeah, shout out
19
to DMG, Doyle
t-
Management. Yeah.
oh, I know, Paul, what some crazy things, but you see that on TV now. I mean on ESPN and all this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But as a professional, what's the reality of the finances behind professional track and field?
Yeah, it's hard, and I think it's something that a lot of people don't talk about. This is my third year post collegiate, or fourth, going into my fourth year post collegiate. And still, I feel like every year we're learning about finances. And so in track and field, particularly in the United States, USA Track and Field provides something called tier funding, and there's also talent protection for people that are coming out of college. But for someone like me, if you want tier funding, which is probably one of the biggest forms of funding that you can get from USA Track and Field, our governing, I don't know what you would call them, I guess, governing body of track and field in our country.
Something like that.
And but you have to fall within the top 15 according to world rank in your event, right? And so world ranking points now are determined by your top 5 meets in the calendar year. But each meet is ranked a level, I guess, right? Bronze, silver, gold, etc. That is assigned a certain amount of points per place, and then your performance, so your height, has another point value, and so those two are averaged together, and then you have a number, and those top five, right, of your performance averaged create your world ranking, right? So in the United States, it's sometimes challenging to have highly ranked meets, right? Or
Right.
several of them. So you see a lot
Right.
of kids going to Europe. And I say that only because that is what the tier funding is based on, right? So if you're not in the top 15, you don't get that tier funding. And the tier funding has been a huge blessing for me. Another form of funding that is available to us as U.S. athlete, track and field athlete, is something called the Elite Athlete Grant, which is put on by the
Mhm.
USATF Foundation, right? And so you apply for it every year, and that is another grant that can build your income. And then you've got prize money, right? So you have prize money from meets that you earn based on placing. Um, Granted, I think the biggest form of income comes from shoe contracts, right, or apparel
Right.
sponsorships. But what I'm learning is it's extremely challenging.
So I mean, from a sponsorship standpoint, like, who, I mean, do you have sponsors right now or?
I have Essex pole vaulting poles, right? They have been overly generous with the amount of poles they have supplied me over the last several years. Really, anything I need, they are first on. They are on it and have been great. But no apparel sponsorship, no shoe contract yet.
Well, hey, if somebody needs to follow the little ticker at the bottom, it gives her IG. But we need to get your sponsorship. That's the big thing, you know.
Yeah, I think yeah, you have to just stay true to yourself, right? And
Right.
I know that if I keep jumping higher and getting myself on the podium at big meets, making world teams, I think eventually it will come. I think the most important um, aspect, I guess, of all of this is that you just have to know that you're going to get better, bet on your future self,
Mhm.
keep making progress, stay healthy. And, I firmly believe, as cheesy as it is, like, things happen for a reason. And so if a sponsorship is, meant to be, then it will be, then it will be. But it's definitely not something that you can force, right? I think
Right.
from what I've
Absolutely.
learned,
Absolutely.
shoe companies or apparel companies are looking for, can you make a team? And if you make the team, can you medal? right? And
Right.
that's just the blunt reality of it.
Check the box. You just did that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if that's enough.
Well,
But it's
hey,
definitely a start. It's definitely a career advancement. And so
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So, I mean, in the United States, a pole vault on the women's side has been on a huge uprise over the
Mhm.
last,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
decade, really. And some of the best pole vaulters in the world are in the U.S. How hard is it to make a U.S. team, knowing that you know there's 5 or 6 individuals ranked in the top 10,
Yeah.
top 12 in the world from the country, and only 3 people get to go.
Right. Yeah, it's extremely hard. And I will say one caveat to that is because it is so hard to make our team. It does set you up nicely though when you do make a
Mm.
world team because your hardest competition most of the time are people in your own country.
Right,
Um,
right.
right. So you kind of have that advantage of competing alongside the best in the world, some of the best in the world, right? Um, but yeah, I think it falls back on not only this athletic preparation and readiness that is required to perform, a high height on any day, but it's also that mental aspect as well. Like you got to be prepared, at nationals, at outdoor nationals to jump high, and
Hmm.
it's not low. You can't go in there and expect 450 to make a team. It's not going to happen, right?
So
And
what's 450 in layman's terms?
oh gosh, what is 450, Coach Fetzer?
I have to put on. I mean, everything's in metric
14.9,
in
I
track and
think.
field, right? Yeah. So I mean, everything's put in metric outside the United States. So we
Right.
sit there and go, oh,
Yeah.
450. I mean, it's
Yeah. Give or take, 4.5 meters, I think is about 14.9,
right.
somewhere around there. I don't know. That's another thing. Like I remember, this is funny. Of the very first time I jumped 401 at
Hmm.
ACC's at Virginia Tech as a
Yep.
freshman
Yep.
indoors, right? And I remember like Sarah DeVita, right? She jumped the same thing. We both jumped 401. And I remember thinking, okay, 401. Like, what is 401? I don't know what 401. And I think Kate Kaufman was redshirting that year, or I can't remember. Maybe she was jumping. I don't know. But I remember she was there and she was like, that's 13 feet, like that's 13 feet. And I had no idea, because like as a freshman, 13 feet was a big deal for me. I had never jumped that
Sure.
coming out of high school. I jumped 12.6 one time at the state meet. And so
Hmm.
to hit 13 was like that next small milestone. But I remember 401. I was like, what's 401? I have no idea. you know?
And you know what? Being oblivious to that sometimes is a great thing because you're just out there competing. You're not
Right.
worrying about what the number is. And I think for
Mhm.
a lot of individuals early in college or in high school when they see it in metric,
Mhm.
they're just trying to clear bars. They're not worrying
Right.
about
Right.
what's this height compared to what I've done before, what's my personal best, and so forth.
Right. Yeah, and I
So
think sometimes that, you gotta channel that younger mindset, when you are a more seasoned athlete, because I've jumped several 76 bars, and then 81 comes around and I'm like, it's like yay much bigger, it's not that
right,
much, you know
not that much bigger.
and for some reason it's like, oh, it's 80 something, or whatever, and you get all
Well,
stressed
hey,
out about it. But
well, I'm gonna one more question. It's a question I always end the show with.
mhm,
Is and get you out on this. What advice would
mhm.
you have for uh, a young lady, wanting to get into pole vaulting or wanting to be where you're at?
Yeah, I would say that the biggest advice that I could offer is believe in yourself more than any other person does, right? Or says they
Mm,
do. Because I think my whole entire career, speaking from experience, and even now, has been built upon that one thing, right? Share with people what you think you are capable of and allow them to help you get to where you want to be, right? Like,
mm,
I feel like, um, a lot of times, or not even a lot of times, but with my experience, right? I was recruited by not a lot of schools out of high school, right? And some coaches were saying, yeah, you don't have it, right? I don't see it. You're not going to get any better. I'm not sure, right? But if you are able to, if you are able to just communicate and illustrate and share what you think you're capable of, what your goals are, what how hard of a worker you are, how bad you want something, then you can kind of get people to buy in also with you. And like I think Coach Wilson, shout out to him too, because I think he really did take a big chance on me. Like I said, jumping 12.6, it could go either way, right? I could have gotten better, and that's how it went, but I also could have not.
Right.
And so I think as a young athlete getting into a sport, I think you just have to believe in yourself, share it with your community, with your parents, with your family, with your friends, whatever, and allow them to help you get to where you want to go. Because I will say, you cannot do it on your own. I
Mhm.
promise you, it will not happen on your own. You have to let other people in to help you get to where you want to be. Um, and
Amen to that.
yeah, and the last thing I would say is have fun, right? Like, don't,
Mm,
especially when you're first starting, and even now. I mean, yes, there's time to be serious, but if you lose the joy that you get from your sport, then it becomes more of a job, and it's not as fun, right? And it'll suck you
right.
dry faster than you realize. And so I think that's kind of like cliche advice is, have fun in your sport, but just be able to find gratitude in the experience, the people you meet,
Right.
you know the amount of time or effort your coach pours into you, right? Like, just try to
Mhm.
find gratitude in all aspects of your sport, because that will also let you ride out your career much longer, I think, than if you were not having fun or not grateful for
That's some great advice without a doubt.
it.
Bridget, thanks for being on the show, and thank you for listening to Just a Cup on Believe. Remember, every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe. I'm Brian Fetzer. Have a great one.
Thank you so much.